we're going to look at how the different areas of the cerebrum relate to the different circuits. There's a deep earth energy circuit, there's a fire circuit, the yellow energy circuit, a lung circuit, a blue energy circuit, and the higher energy, well, the brain and higher energy circuit, which we're working with anyway. And all of those have particular areas in the brain. And it may not be accurate. It may be just how I'm seeing it. I don't know. Who knows what's right and wrong? I'm so used to these energies. I just feel them and I get a sense of where they are in my cerebrum, but you might sense them in different ways. And that is fine. And I think as people go through these webinars and start getting a feeling for all of these different circuits, you can just feel them almost instantly and relating to those particular organs and in life around us. And I think this is what is actually important today, and I hadn't even thought of including it. What it seems to be coming through quite strongly is not just how we perceive these energies in ourselves, but a bit like astrology, how they are played out in the energies around us. And I think the earth goes through cycles of energy moving from one organ to another through the year. And I kind of feel that as we work on, we're in tune with something anyway, because I just get so many people just saying, that was exactly the right webinar for what I'm going through at this time. So I think, there is a general unfolding energy and everybody's in that, whether they maybe don't have the individual sense of themselves as much as they would like to be, but they are in a relationship with the earth and the energies of the earth, and trucking through those energies and going through those particular things as we go through them. So to one level or another, we will be bringing that in today. The qualities, those energies in the earth. Someone mentioned last time that they liked it a bit better when it was two meditations rather than one long one. And I thought, as we have done long ones for a while now, I may try that again, because I think this particular webinar we can split into two meditations. We can do one meditation which is more about the breathing motion of the brain, and then another meditation which is going to be more about the energies of the brain and cerebrum and how they're relating to the energies of the earth. We'll also be looking at how they relate to the energies of the cranium, the face, the pelvis. I'm not sure how much of these different things are going to be involved. I wanted to include how they relate to the sexual energies as well, and the Kundalini, because there's something quite poignant in that around the thalamus that we're going to be working with, and the third eye, they're deeply healing in the sexual energies. I was just going to talk about the breathing, but as I've mentioned that, I'll mention what that is. And for some reason, when I first taught this, I thought it would be easy for people, but for some reason, it brings a lot to the surface when we work with the higher energies of the sexual energies. Each circuit within the sexual energies has different levels, and where they connect to the third eye is the high end of each circuit. And with the deep dark energies, it's not so much. It's a bit higher in the sit bones and a bit higher in the sacrum, but that's all. But for the other ones, it seems to bring a lot to the surface because it's the head of the penis and it's the head of the vagina. And I think it's thought of as either more intimate or more to do with sexuality. So maybe brings to the surface more around that karma. I've just noticed the times that I've taught it, it's suddenly it's bringing up a lot for people. So I'm just saying it in advance, so just to notice where you go when I start teaching that. And for the red energies, the fire circuit, which is the ovaries, testes, uterus and prostate, it is also the glands of the penis and the glands of the clitoris, which is the head of the penis and the head of the clitoris. And then in the yellow energy circuit, which is the clitoris and the erectile tissue in the penis, it's the head of the clitoris, of the erectile tissue in the clitoris, and it's the head of the erectile tissue in the penis, it's the top. And then with the blue energies circuit, which is the kidneys, adrenals, bladder, urethra, vagina, and the soft tissue of the penis, it is the head of the vagina. It's the lips of the vagina for the women, and it's the foreskin for men. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it's the culmination of that energy tends to bring things to surface, but it is also the connection to the third eye in the center of the brain and the connection up into the higher self. So maybe it's just something to do with the transformation. You know, that is where those energies start transforming more strongly, that area. But just to be aware of how that feels when we go into that. And interestingly, in the eye socket that relates to the higher energies, it is a combination of all of the different colours. And like the head of the clitoris and the head of the vagina, the head of the penis, it's like they include nearly all of the energies anyway. And as they come together, they light up this higher energy in this brain and this connection to the beyond. But we're going to more work with that in the second meditation. In the first meditation, we're going to be more physically working with the brain. It's a physical breathing motion of the brain. And there's a language perception here that needs to be taken into account when we're viewing our brain, because brain is singular, but the cerebellum is split into two. and the cerebrum is split into two. They're like lungs, they're paired organs. So it should be the breathing motion of the brains, in the same way as you'd say the breathing motion of the lungs, or the breathing motion of the kidneys, or the breathing motion of the testes or ovaries. It's plural, and the brain should be plural because two halves connecting together in the central brain complex. And we're going to first look, well, actually, let me carry on with that a little bit. For me, all of these paired organs kind of relate to the lungs, and they've got a breathing motion that relates to the lungs, and they all come together. They've all got a pipe of or connection of some kind into the center line, and they open up like flowers away from the center line. It's the same with the cerebrum. It's joined in the third eye, in the center of the brain, which we'll look in the anatomy, kind of directly into that central brain cortex. And also there's a whole channels of neural pathways. They come down just below the thalamus and into what's called the midbrain, which isn't really the middle of that. It's high up. It's like the throat of the central brain cortex. But let's just look at a bit of that anatomy and how these organs join in the middle, so you can get a better idea of how they breathe. Now, my paintings aren't hugely helpful because they give more the idea of the fluid, but it can show the different organs. So here we have the cerebrum, this great big organ, which we're mainly working with today. It's 85% of the whole brain. Then behind it you've got the cerebellum, and then we've got this central brain, or what I call the central brain complex, and the thalamus at the top is part of this central brain complex, but for me it's also part of the cerebrum. It's part of both. The brain is divided. You have a tentorium here, which is a membrane, and it sits over the cerebellum and the lower central brain cortex. And this is the face here, and it goes up and comes above the eye. So this divides the lower brain from the upper brain. And I think that is all that I'm going to show you in those. So the brain is adjoined in the middle on the center line by the center of the thalamus. I've got to remember these names. The corpus callosum, and the one I always forget is the fornix. And we'll just look at those pictures. It's quite hard to conceptualize this area of the brain, but I'm going to show a few different pictures that will hopefully give you an inner idea of what is happening here. So here we have, you see how the cerebellum looks quite a bit like a pair of lungs. This looks, for me, a bit like intestines, the actual cerebrum. And now you can't see the thalamus, you can just see the sides of it. But can you see a little dot there in the middle there? That is where the two halves of the thalamus are joining. So the two halves of the thalamus join there, and then the thalamus spreads out sideways into the rest of each hemisphere. There's two halves to the thalamus. They join in the middle and then they spread out into the brain. And then this here, this is the fornix. So that is joining across the top of the central ventricle, or the third ventricle there. It's called the fornix. And then this is the corpus callosum, which is the major join between the two halves of the brain. And I think a lot of people just think this is some kind of, corpus callosum is some kind of connective tissue connecting the two halves of the brain, but that is not so. The corpus callosum is just made of myelinated axons. These are, you've got the nucleus of the, you can't even remember what they're called, the brain cells that transmit the neurons. The nucleus of the neuron. Then you've got like the wire, that is the axon, and then to make it all work better, it gets myelinating glial cells from the corpus callosum. Is just that. There's no nuclei there, there's no astrocyte cells there, it's just these electrical wires. So it does connect the two sides of the brain together, but there's this massive telephone thing going on back and forth between the two halves of the brain through the corpus callosum. It's not just something that joins it together. The fornix, I think that is all the cells. It's the neurons, the astrocyte cells, the different cells, and the same with the center of the thalamus. It's just where the two halves of the thalamus join. So, I'm not going to give you all the names of the different things. It's just pointless if people don't know them to give them all the different things, but just showing the pictures. And it's a bit mirror image. So you've got the thalamus here, but it joins to these other areas around it, and then that all spreads out. So it's not just an isolated thing, the thalamus in the middle. It does, from here, just does spread out through these different organs of the brain into the whole brain. Might as well show that. Now you've got a thalamus, and somewhere in the middle here is where the two halves of the thalamus are joining, and where they're joining was that little blip in the middle of the third ventricle where the two halves join. That red bit is the thalamus, and then it's joining to this other part of the brain that's wrapping around it. So the thalamus isn't just exist on its own, it starts spreading out through the different organs of the brain. All right, okay. So it shows the corpus callosum cut here. So right at the top there is where it's cut, and it comes like a hood right down to the bottom here, where it's also cut. So you can see the top, I guess that's the front. Yeah, that's the front, and that. So this is kind of the front of the brain here, this is the back, and you can see it's a bit narrower here and a bit wider there, and then from there it just spreads out. It is the axons of the neurons, and it just spreads out like a tree through all of the brain. This is inside the ventricles. These are spaces full of cranial fluid. Then you've got the thalamus here. Oh no, you can't. Thalamus. See, I'm just pointing randomly. I can't even see what I'm pointing at. But you've got the thalamus there. I'm not sure if it shows on the other side, but you've got the thalamus there. But over the top of it, you've got the fornix, and this is the next place that joins the two sides of the brain. And this continues around in this arc. I've forgotten the name of it, but it's something everyone might remember. The hippocampus or the hypocampus, or this is the fornix, rolls around and becomes a hypocampus. I think this is a lot to do with our emotional energies there. And then you've got one half of the thalamus below that, one half, and then below that you've got the third ventricle. It's like a wheel of cranial fluid, and then the thalamus joins but by this small spot in the middle. And they are joining the two halves of the cerebrum. They're what's holding it together into the third eye, or that whole area. This is where they show like these Egyptian things of this eye with an eyebrow or whatever is this whole thing here. And that's the eyebrow at the top, I guess. And then you've got the fornix and then the little bib in the middle. But that whole area that people depict as the third eye, it's also where the two hemispheres of the brain are adjoining. The other place, oh, let's look at that one. Okay, so you've got the two halves of the thalamus here, and in the middle of this is the third ventricle, but also there will be that spot in the middle of there somewhere joining these two halves. Also, you've got the cerebrum all around here. You get the channels of neural pathways. This is called the midbrain, and they come down and make the midbrain there. From the cerebellum here, they all come around, and the pons is all the neural pathways coming into this central stem. So you get this central stem with branches of neurons coming in here and here. And the thalamus isn't just alone, it does also spread out into the whole brain around. So I don't know if that confuses people more or makes it harder to imagine. But you've got like a cauliflower joined in the middle by some bits, and then two stalks coming down joined. Then you've got another cauliflower here or plant coming round into this central cortex and travelling down. And with the lungs, it's the other way up. You've got these two coming together over the heart, and the tube is upwards. So it's a bit like the cerebellum is level, coming in level. The cerebrum is dropping down vertically, and the lungs coming into the rising, and they all breathe. They've got an opening and closing, an opening and closing, with the kidneys from the back and the adrenals also this opening and closing. And you know, this bit that I'm going to describe, it's there. I experience it, I use it, I try and work out how it is a full breath through the body and through the brain. I have a bit of trouble with it. A lot of people have a bit of trouble with it. In our normal breathing, we just experience everything opening on the in-breath and everything closing on the out-breath. In reality, yes, the lungs are doing that because they've got an opening to the outside, so the lungs can expand in all directions because the air sacs are filling out with more air, so everything can expand in all directions. And that may be able to happen into the sinuses here as well, but I doubt they're going to expand and contract much because they're surrounded by bone. But the brain, if it expands out sideways, it's not going to expand out front and back and top and bottom. If it expands this way, it's going to shorten top to bottom and it's going to shorten front to back. So with the brain, there's an opening to the sides on the in-breath with the lungs. At the same time, there's a shortening top to bottom and there's a shortening front to back. So a big opening to the sides, easy to experience. If we include where it's shortening, brings in a different type of breathing, a more cellular, I don't even know the words, kind of ancient amoebic breathing of some kind, where it's just like one cell opening in one direction, be shortening in the other, and then narrowing in one direction, lengthening. It feels like an organism. What's wrong with my head today? Maybe it's because we're working with the brain that I can't think. It's just, the words normally are there, but they're not there today. So it brings in this different mode of breathing that feels much slower and almost like hydraulics. And we're going to use that to open the third eye in the center of the brain, and also the third eye in the face is between the eyes. It's here, but back it's the, again, the word's gone. Whatever that bone is there between the ethmoid, between the eyes. It's the third eye for the face in a way. So that connects to the third eye. We'll work a bit with the forwards back. So it is shortening so this can expand, and then this is lengthening so that can narrow. That connects into, the word's gone again, whatever the ethmoid between the eyes, that connects to the ethmoid. And also there's a shortening and lengthening through the body, from the arms and legs, but as a unit through the torso. It's from the pelvic floor. If you think of it, you've got the abdomen, shortened, the diaphragm comes down, it shortens top to bottom and expands to the sides. Diaphragm drops, the heart drops, the trachea, the esophagus, the whole center between the lungs drops because it's on top of the diaphragm. That connects to the hyoid bone, that connects to the tongue, that connects to the roof of the mouth, that connects to the septum in the middle of the nose, that connects to the ethmoid. So you've got the tentorium, the membrane dividing through the brain, the vertical falx dividing the brain vertically, connecting to the top of the ethmoid, and the septum connecting to the lower. And when you allow those breaths, it lights up the ethmoid and lights up the third eye in the center of the brain. So there's one way that opens up the third eye in the center of the brain with the breath. And one thing that cured me of Lyme disease and all of the chest infections I was getting with Lyme disease was really learning how my brain breathed, because the Lyme disease was attacking the meninges of the brain, attacking the brain, and everything was getting very leathery, and that was impeding the breathing motion. And the brain shutting down breathing, that was closing down the lungs. And I think this interplayed with my youth, because I hadn't really thought about it before as brain damage, but I think in childhood, or if we're abused in different ways, I think it, not just emotionally and physically, but I think it impacts on the brain and learning and all sorts of behavioral things in different ways. It affects the brain. And learning how this breathes helps to heal that. I think it gets closed down from breathing, and then the lungs close down. Like in children with emotional stuff, often you'll get like asthma and eczema. It's like the lungs closing down. Eczema's like the external lungs. And maybe what's holding that in place is that whatever is happening to them is also happening to the brain, and the brain is closing down, it's stopping breathing, the energies aren't going round it in a natural format as they were before. And once this starts breathing in a natural way, it starts instating, well, I'm just going to make up words that aren't right anymore because they're just not coming. I'm going to instate the original matrix there before the trauma. So in a way, it clears that and starts bringing the health back to that. And it's a bit like the asthma, the closing down of the lungs can't get better on their own. This has to heal as well. And in holographic breathing, we have the perfect tool for allowing this to breathe, but to properly understand the breathing motion of the brain. One, you have to realize it's plural and made out of, see, I can't even remember the name. I was cauliflowers. I was going to have to change it to cabbages. Made of these cauliflowers that go into a central stem. You know, if you really get bored with it, you can cook with it later. You can make your own stew. And as this breathes, then that can breathe. It's not like you can heal this without properly healing that. And at this level, there's a much better connection into the higher self. And it doesn't just, once it starts working through the brain, you're not just healing this lifetime. You're no longer just healing this lifetime. As that connection up starts working, you're healing all lifetimes. So any kind of brain virus or amoeba, whatever they're called, bacteria, as I had, attacking the brain, it's important to be able to understand how this breathes. To understand how it breathes, you have that. It's like a balloon. It can't just, unless you're pumping it up with air, which you can't do with the brain, for it to expand this way shortens. And that is what we're going to work with in this first meditation. I don't know how long this will go on for, because I actually want to spend more time with the energetics. But we'll just get an experience of the brain breathing as one meditation. Then we'll have a short break, and then we'll do another meditation with the energies.